day my brother sold our childhood home, he called me like he had just won a victory. Said the old house was dead weight, and that selling it was the smartest decision he'd ever made. I didn't argue, because while he was celebrating the sale, I was already signing the paperwork. And the moment he discovered who the buyer actually was, everything he thought he had, one turned into his biggest mistake. My name is Thomas Carter, and the house my brother sold wasn't just another piece of property. It was the house we grew up in, the one our father built with his own hands nearly 40 years ago. Every corner of that place carried a memory. The old oak tree in the backyard, where we used to race each other as kids. The kitchen table where our mother insisted we eat dinner together every night, no matter how busy life became. That house wasn't valuable because of the land or the walls. It was valuable because it held our entire childhood. But my older brother Michael never looked at it that way. To him, everything had a price. If something could be sold for a good amount of money, then keeping it was simply bad business. That was the difference between us. While I stayed close to home and visited our parents every week, helping them repair things around the property and handle small responsibilities as they grew older, Michael built his life in the city. Bigger deals, faster money, a life that moved too quickly for nostalgia. When our parents passed away within a year of each other, the house became the last thing connecting us to the family we once had. I believed we would keep it, maybe restore parts of it, maybe even let our children see the same rooms we had grown up in. But Michael had already decided something else. The place is too big, he told me during a phone call one evening. The maintenance alone is a waste of money. We should sell it while the market is high. I tried to explain that the house meant more than numbers on a contract. It wasn't just property, it was history. But to Michael, sentiment was simply a distraction from profit. In his mind, holding on to that house was like holding on to a bad investment. Within a few weeks, he had already contacted a real estate agent. Offers started appearing. Phone calls became more frequent. Michael talked about closing timelines and buyer interest as if the decision had already been made. The process moved faster than I expected, almost like a train that had already left the station. One afternoon, my phone rang. Michael sounded unusually excited, almost proud of himself. "It's done," he said. "The house is sold." For a moment, I didn't say anything. I could hear the satisfaction in his voice, like he had just completed the smartest deal of his life. To him, the story was already over. The house was gone, the money was secured, and the past had been turned into profit. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know yet, was that the person who had just bought our childhood home wasn't a stranger at all. In the moment he discovered the name on the final paperwork, that victory he was celebrating was about to feel very different. The closing was scheduled 3 days later at a small office downtown. Mikhail called me that morning, sounding relaxed, almost triumphant. "You should come," he said.
Right.
"It's the final step. After today, the house is officially gone." I told him I'd be there. When I arrived, Michael was already sitting at the conference table with the real estate agent. Papers were neatly stacked in front of him, and he looked like a man who had just finished a successful negotiation. He even joked about how quickly the property had sold. "Turns out," he said with a small laugh, "nostalgia doesn't stop someone from making a good offer." I nodded quietly and took a seat across the room. Michael didn't seem to notice that I wasn't asking questions. To him, the important part had already happened. The deal was done. Today was just paperwork. A few minutes later, the agent walked back into the room with the final contract. She placed it on the table and began explaining the last steps before the transfer became official. Michael leaned forward confidently and reached for the pen. Then he paused. His eyes moved down the page, scanning the section where the buyer's information was printed. At first, his expression didn't change, and his eyebrows slowly pulled together as if he thought he had read something wrong. He looked up at the agent. "Is this correct?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes, that's the purchasing party." Michael looked at the paper again, then slowly turned his head toward me. For the first time since he had walked into that room, he looked uncertain. "You bought it?" he said. I met his eyes calmly. "Not exactly me," I replied. "A holding company I set up a few weeks ago." The room went quiet. Michael stared at the contract again, realizing what had happened. While he was rushing to sell the house as quickly as possible, I had quietly stepped in and made the only offer that mattered, the one that would keep the property exactly where it belonged. You said you didn't want to fight about the house, he said slowly. I didn't, I answered. That's why I didn't fight. Michael leaned back in his chair, the excitement from earlier completely gone. The deal he had celebrated just days before now looked very different. He thought he had sold our childhood home to a stranger. What he had actually done was sell it to the one person who was never going to let it leave the family.